We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph and Meseches Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 47a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked, is the reason for a eulogy for the honor of the dead, or is it for the honor of the living? And the Gemara says, Tashma, coming here the following proof. Nivze be'enov nimas. It says that somebody who is a tzaddik, he despises somebody who is a rasha. Zeh Chizkiyo melech Yehuda. This refers to Chizkiyo, the king of Yehuda. Shegir atzmos avev al mita shel chavolim. He dragged the bones of his father on a bed of ropes. And the idea is that he wanted to disgrace, so to speak, his father, because his father was a rasha, his father was achaz. And the Gemara says, V'imisham yikra dechayu. Now, if the reason for a eulogy is to honor the living, so my time, so what is the reason that he would drag his body on a bed of ropes? It doesn't make sense to disgrace the body, because you should treat the body properly, you should eulogize for the honor of the living. And the Gemara answers, Kiechi the Tahavale kapara. The reason why he did that really was because he wanted a kapara l'avua. He wanted there to be an atonement for his father. It was through this disgrace, so to speak, that there would be an atonement for his father. But the Gemara continues, Misham kapara diavua, but because of an atonement of the father, mashu le yikra di Yisrael, so then he'll delay the honor of the Jewish people. In other words, if it's true that it's yikra dechai, it's for the honor of the living, are you allowed to forego the honor of the living in order to get an atonement for the father? And the Gemara says, yes, Yisrael gufayu nichlu, Klal Yisrael wanted that, the michli yikrayu legabe, because they wanted to give up that their own honor for the forgiveness, for the atonement of one of their kings. And Rashi explains, Al mita shel chavolim, again on a bed of ropes. Derech bizayon, this was a way of disgracing him. Mimnei shahaya aviv rasha, because his father was a rasha. Uvizeu le'ein kol, he did this in front of everyone. Kadeshi yisyasru acherim, so others should take musar. V'lechvod atzmo lo chash, he didn't care about his own honor. Umimnei kavod av nami lekal mechash, he didn't have to worry about the honor of his father. The nasi ba'amcha ksib ba'osa ma'isa amcha, you only have to honor the nasi if he's doing the proper things. Ma'isa amcha, the ways of your nation. Nivza be'inav hu atzmo nisbazev nimas b'fnei atzmo shelo chash lechvod b'makom kiddush Hashem. What the pasuk means is nivza be'ein, if somebody doesn't care about his own honor, if it's an issue of kiddush Hashem. And so again, the Gemara's question was v'yamard kavod she'osin l'meis eino shelo ela shel chaim. If the point of honoring the dead is really not for the dead, but it's for the living, my time of it hachi lama bizu es hachaim. Why would he do that? Why would he disgrace the living, so to speak? And the Gemara says in this particular case, that's what Klal Yisrael actually wanted. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here the following proof. Amar Lahen, he said to them, this is talking about Rabbeinu HaKadosh, it's talking about Rebbe. He said, Al tisbeduni ba'ayoros. He said, you shouldn't eulogize me in the smaller villages. V'yamrit yikra dechai. Now, if you say the point of the eulogy is to honor the living, my nafkale mineh, why is he saying, my nafkale mineh, why is he saying not to eulogize in these smaller cities? And the Gemara says, on the contrary, kasavar lisyakru be Yisrael tzvei. On the contrary, what Rebbe was saying was that if you do it in the larger cities, you'll have larger gatherings, and it will be more of an honor for Klal Yisrael. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here the following proof. This is from the Mishnah. Halino lichvodo. Let's say they leave the dead body overnight, but for the honor of that dead body, lahavilo aron v'tachrichin, to bring the casket, to bring the burial shrouds. So ain't no over all of them. Then there's no transgression for leaving the body overnight. And so the Gemara says, my lav, so doesn't it mean to say over here, lichvodo, you're leaving it for its honor? It's lichvodo shel meis, it's for the honor of the dead. You see that the eulogy is for the honor of the dead. But the Gemara says, not necessarily, lo no, lichvodo shel chai. Maybe it will really means to say, for the honor of the living. That's why we're doing this. But the Gemara says, misham kvodo shel chai mavis le'lameis. But because of the honor of the living, now we're going to delay when it comes to the burial of the body. We'll leave out the body. And the Gemara says, in yes, kiyamar achmona lo solin nivlaso aleit, because when the pasuk says you don't leave the body on the wood, you don't leave the body overnight, dumya de taloi, it's similar to the taloi de isbe bizayin, meaning when there's a disgrace. That's what we're concerned about. Aval hacha, but over here, kaven de less bizayin, here on the contrary, you're doing it to have a nicer burial for the mace. There is no bizayin, so then it does not apply. Then you are allowed to in fact wait in order to have a better burial for the mace. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here the following proof. The Brisa says, Halino lichvodo lishma lavayoros, lahavilo makonanos, lahavilo arn v'sachrichin. Let's say again, they leave the body overnight, but it's for that honor. It's for the honor of the mace. They're doing it in order that people should hear about him in the ayoros, in the villages, in order to bring people to properly eulogize, to bring the casket, to bring the burial shrouds. Eino over olav. Again, there's no transgression. Shekala osa eino ela lichvodo shel meis, because that's being done for the covet of the mace. And so it certainly seems from here that this is all being done for the honor of the mace. And the Gemara says, no, hachikamar, what it really means to say is as follows, if you're doing it for the honor of the living, ein bo bizayon lameis, that's no longer considered a disgrace to the mace. And Rashi explains the language of lishmoa. Again, it said they left the body lichvodo, lishmoa ola ba'yoros. Rashi says it means kemo vayishma sholosh and asifa. It's a language of really gathering lahaspido. You're gathering to do a proper eulogy. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, another proof. Rabbi Nassan says, Simen yafa l'meis shenifroin mimenu la'achar misa, meis shelo nispad v'lo nikvar, a good sign for a mace that they punished is when they punish him, when there's something bad, so to speak, that happens after his death. Let's say you have a dead person that wasn't eulogized, he wasn't buried, o shechaya gorasa, or he's dragged by a wild animal, o shahaya geshamim mizalfen al mitaso, or let's say there's rain that's falling on his casket, zeu simen yafa l'meis, that's considered a good sign for the mace. And the Gemara says, Shmami, no, you see from this, Yikra Deshechvi, that what we're really concerned with is the honor of the dead. And the Gemara says, Shmami, no, indeed we see that that is the case. And Rashi explains, Simen Yafa L'meis Kishenefroin Mimenu Ba'olam Hazeh La'achar Misa. When there's a punishment to the mace in this world after he dies, we see that the Yeshlo Kapar B'kach, he'll get an atonement through that. And again, the Gemara said, Shmami no Yikra Deshechvi, you see that it's for the honor of the dead. The Lav Yikra Deshechvi, Amai Mechaber B'Bizyoni, if not that it was for the concern of the honor of the dead, so why would there be a kapara by his disgrace? Obviously, what's being done after he dies, like eulogizing, that's being done for the honor of the dead. And when that doesn't happen, when there's some kind of a bizoyon, so then it ends up being a kapara. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Lo heyu kovrin v'chulu, somebody who's executed by the court, he's not buried in his ancestral plot. There are special graveyards designated for somebody who is put to death by the court. And the Gemara says, V'chol kachlama, why do they have to do this? Why do they have to have a separate cemetery? L'fishein kovrin rasha etzel tzadik. The reason is that you're not supposed to bury the wicked by the righteous. The Amar Rav Acha bar Chanina, because Rav Acha bar Chanina says, Minayin shein kovrin rasha etzel tzadik. How do we know that you don't bury the wicked by the righteous? Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Vayem kovrim ish. They were burying a man. V'nei roes hagudud vayashlichu es ish bekever Elisha. They ended up throwing the body in the grave of Elisha. Vayiga ha'ish ba'atzmos Elisha, and then the man, his body touched the bones of Elisha. Vayachi vayakam al raglav, and he ended up coming to life and standing on his feet. The idea was he wasn't supposed to be buried near Elisha. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Papa, so Rav Papa said to him, what kind of proof are you bringing from Elisha? Maybe there was a different reason why this person came to life. V'dilma lekiyuma, maybe it was in order to fulfill the pasuk. The pasuk says about Elisha, Vayhina pishnayim beruchacha Eli, it says that Elisha was going to have double in terms of the spirit of Nevuah from Eliyahu, who was the mentor of Elisha, and the idea of double is that he would bring two people to life. Eliyahu Navi only brought one person to life. Maybe this was all just a fulfillment. It was a second person that Elisha brought to life. The Gemara says, Amar Lei said back to him, if that was what was going on, if so, Hainu Detanya al Raglov, Amar uleveso lo halach, would it say that he stood up on his feet and he didn't go to his house? Clearly, it's not in order to bring this person back to life. Rather, the reason was because, again, you're not supposed to have a rasha buried by a tzaddik. If it was in order to bring him back to life, he would have gotten up and he would have went back to his house. But the Gemara then says, Elavayhina pishnayim. But then, if that's the case, where do we find the double spirit of nevuah that Elisha has? If this doesn't count as a second person that was resurrected, the Gemara says, Hechim ashkachas. Again, where do we find that second time, the achia, that he brought someone to life? Amar le Rabbi Yochanan said to him, Sharipa tzaras Naaman. That second time really was when Elisha healed the tzaras of Naaman. She shkula kames, because tzaras is considered the equivalent of being dead. The chsiv, as it's written, al noti kames, shouldn't be like the dead. This is talking about when Miriam got tzaras. And the Gemara continues, Uchashem shein kovrin rasha etzel tzadik, just like we don't bury the wicked by the righteous, kachein kovrin rasha chamer etzel rasha kal. You're also not supposed to bury someone who's a big rasha next to someone who's less of a rasha. But the Gemara continues, if that's the case, v'liskon arba kavar, so why not have 4 cemeteries? Because there are 4 different death penalties, skila, sreif, hereg, and chenek. Why do we only have 2 cemeteries for death penalties? And the Gemara says to that, shnei kavaras gemara gemiri, the fact that we just have 2 cemeteries, that's a tradition that we have, and that's why we have 2 and not 4. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ula says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Achal chaylev v'hifresh karban v'heimir daso. Let's say a person, he eats chaylev, so he has to bring a karban. He separates an animal for that karban, but then he completely rejects his religion. At that point in time, he really can't bring the karban. V'chazerbo, but then he retracts and he goes back to his religion. He goes back to Judaism. Still we say, Hol v'nidcha yidcha. Once that karban was pushed off and he couldn't bring it when he was heimir daso, when he was an apikora, so to speak, so then even though he came back, he's no longer allowed to bring that animal as a karban. And the Gemara continues, Itmar Nami was stated as well, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that Rabbi Avo says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Achal chaylev v'hifresh karban v'nishtata v'chazer v'nishtafa, a similar kind of case. He eats chaylev, he separates his karban, but then he becomes insane, and then he becomes sane again. Hoel v'nidcha yidcha, once the karban was pushed off when he was insane, so it was pushed off, the fact that he got better, it doesn't make a difference. These seem to be the same teachings, so the Gemara says, Utzricha, we need to teach them both. The Ashvin and Kamais, if you only had the first one where he rejected his religion, Mishum di'iu docha nafshi biyadayim, because there he actively pushed himself away from the karban, and so there you might think it's pushed off. Aval haidim emela kadachi, when a person goes insane, it happens automatically. And makiyashin dami, I might think that's just like sleeping, and when he wakes up, so to speak, he can bring the karban. V'yashmin and hachan, if you only had it over here, Mishum dein biyado lachzer, going insane is something that is not in his control to go back from. It's out of his control. Aval hasam de biyado lachzer, but when a person rejects his religion, so it's within his capability of changing his mind. He has the control, so imalos, I might think it's not the same. So tzricha, that's why it's necessary to teach both cases. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Afano nami tanina, we learn the same thing in the following. Braisa hayuba kodshim mizbeach yamusu, kodshe berek habayis yiftu. It says if there was kodshim, so then the kodshe mizbeach, they have to die, and the kodshe berek habayis, they should be redeemed. And the context here is by an irnei dachas, that you don't burn the kodshim together with the rest of the things you're burning in the city. So we asked on this, Amaya Musa, why is it that the Kodshe Mizbeach, these are animals that are supposed to be brought on the Mizbeach, why do they die? Kevan de Iktal Havaluhu Kapara, because once they are killed, so then already meaning to say the people of the city are killed, so now they've been atoned for. Velisku Legavoan, so then we should say that the karban is able to be brought again. You can't bring the karban while they're Rishoim, but once they get an atonement, after the Yer Nidachas is wiped out, why can't we bring the karban? So Lav Mishum, is it not because of what we just said above? The Amrin on whole Vinidchu Yidchu, we say once a karban, once that animal is pushed off from being a karban because they were Rishoim, so it's pushed off, it doesn't come back. The Gemara says, Amar le Abaya, Abaya says, Misavrid meis mitoch risho havale kapara. It's not true at all. The whole question is not a question, so it's not a proof. Do you think that if someone dies while he's still a rasha, that he gets a kapara? It's not true. Meis mitoch risho, if someone dies while he's in his state of being a wicked person, lo havale kapara, he's not going to get a kapara. Those who are killed in the Yer Nidachas, it's not a kapara for them, and therefore you would never have been able to bring the karban with that argument that now all of a sudden they have a kapara. And the Gemara continues, the Tani Rav Shemaya, as Rav Shemaya taught, Yachol afilu pirshu avosa midarchei tzibur yitma. I might think that even if his father separated from the ways of the community, that he should become tamei, and this is referring to a Kohen who is normally mitame for his relative, so I might think even if his relative separated from the proper way, maybe still the Kohen should become tamei. It's not true. Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, Bi'amav ba'osa ma'isa amav. We learn from the pasuk of Amav, he has to be doing like the actions of his nation, and so in this case, when he's separated from the ways of his father, the Kohen does not become tamei. And so we see from here also that even death does not provide an atonement if he dies while he's a rasha. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rava, Rava said back to him, Mika medamis nereg mitoch risho lemeis mitoch risho. Are you comparing someone who's killed, like by an ir nidachas, where he's killed while he's wicked, to somebody who dies while he's wicked? Meis mitoch risho, if somebody just dies a regular death while he's wicked, kevan dechi orche kamai, since he died in the normal fashion, so lo havale kapara, there we understand he does not have an atonement. But nereg mitoch risho, but if he's killed because of his wickedness, kevan de lav ki orche mayas, since he didn't die in the normal fashion, havale kapara, that actually would be an atonement. So it's not true what we're saying. Really, there is an atonement in that situation, and therefore it really is a proof to what we're trying to prove, because why can't we bring these karbanos by the ir hanidachas? Apparently, once it's pushed off, it's pushed off. And the Gemara continues, Teida, you should know, d'chsiv, because it's written in the pasuk. This is a pasuk in Tehillim, Mizmor Liyosaf, Elokim bo goyim Benachal osecha, Timu es heichal kodshecha, nosnu es nivlas avodecha, machol la'of hashamayim, besar chasidecha l'chaiso oretz. And the pasuk here is talking about the nations that are invading the Beis Hamikdash. They're being metame heichal kodshecha, and it says that they're putting the nivlas avodecha, they're putting the corpses of your servants as food to the of hashamayim, to the birds, and besar chasidecha, the flesh of your righteous ones, are l'chaiso oretz. And so the Gemara says, "My avodecha, my chasidecha." What are we referring to when we talk about avodecha, your servants, and we talk about chasidecha, your righteous ones? Lav chasidecha, chasidecha mamish. Chasidecha means those who are actually righteous. And avodecha, what does avodecha mean? Hanach de mechayvi dina de meikara v'kevan de iktal kari lo avodecha. We're talking there about people who are chayiv in court, and once they're killed, so then they're called avodecha. And again, apparently it seems that they do have a kapara. But the Gemara says, Amar le Abaya. Abaya says to him, Mikam medamis, can you really compare? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Zayin Amid Beis.